Heights is an 1847 Gothic tragedy by Emily Bronte. It was her only novel and is considered a foundational novel in the Gothic genre. So, Wuthering Heights! I've never read it. Listen, I'm a stubborn old lady and I always have been. When someone insists that I have to read something because it's the best thing since sliced bread, it's a classic, everyone's read it, blah, 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 it only makes me more resistant to reading it. I'm one of those people, okay? I've seen and heard the references over the years, and since I love Evil Dead Rise, I vividly recall that one passage being read in the prologue. But since the book is so prolific and not that hard to get a hold of, I felt no urgent need to read it until I started seeing people's reactions to the trailer for the 2026 movie, which I'll be getting into a bit more later on in the review. But since the controversy surrounding the trailer intrigued me and I figured I'd be going out and seeing the movie, I thought it would be worth it to read the book first. Alright, so the 1847 book is narrated by a guy named Mr. Lockwood, who's come to live as a tenant in Thrushcross Grange in the moors of West Yorkshire, which is not far from his landlord's home, Wuthering Heights, in 1801. He subsequently encounters his landlord, Heathcliff, as well as his house staff, daughter-in-law Cathy Linton, and a young man named Hareton Earnshaw, all of whom proceed to act like unhinged weirdos in front of and to their new tenant. After accidentally stranding himself at Wuthering Heights for the night, Lockwood comes upon the journals of one Cathy Earnshaw. He falls asleep and proceeds to dream of young Cathy banging on the window and demanding to be let in.
Let me in. Let me in.
And Heathcliff comes busting in, freaking out over the possibility that Cathy Earnshaw could possibly have come to him as a spirit. Lockwood heads home the next day and starts talking to Nellie Dean, the housekeeper at Thrushcross Grange, who grew up with Heathcliff, Cathy Earnshaw, and her brother Hindley Earnshaw. She proceeds to give him the lowdown on Heathcliff and company. So down about in 1771 or so, the Earnshaw family lived in Wuthering Heights, Mr. and Mrs. Earnshaw and their two kids, Hindley and Catherine. One day, Mr. Earnshaw comes home with an orphan he found living on the streets of Liverpool, whom he calls Heathcliff. Heathcliff is repeatedly described by multiple characters throughout the book as having a darker complexion and features than the typical English person in this day and age. The Earnshaws take Heathcliff in, and soon after, Mrs. Earnshaw dies. Mr. Earnshaw and Cathy become attached to Heathcliff, the former treating him as one of his own children, even better than his biological son Hindley, who ends up hating Heathcliff with a passion. Nellie becomes Hindley's ally for a while, and they bully Heathcliff a lot. At some point, Hindley goes off into the wild blue yonder. It might have been for school, hell if I remember. And for a while, Cathy and Heathcliff become bosom buddies. They spent their time running wild on the moors and getting into all sorts of trouble, right up until Mr. Earnshaw dies suddenly. Then Hindley comes back with a wife, Frances, in tow, and the two take control of Wuthering Heights. Hindley's still bitter about being second class to the orphan kid and proceeds to reduce Heathcliff to a servant. Cathy and Heathcliff rebel by becoming even more feral than they already were, or at least feral according to 18th century British countryside standards, I guess. I feel like this might be the right place to give you a general description of Cathy and Heathcliff. Heathcliff is portrayed by Nellie as quiet, surly, ill-tempered, and generally not very nice. Cathy is portrayed as a spoiled, temperamental wild child. Again, take this within the context that this is a book that takes place in the late 1700s in the British countryside, and it's being written by a woman living in the Victorian era. And, this is Nellie's evaluation of their characters through that lens. My tendency is to say that Emily Bronte probably meant for Nellie to be a reliable historian in this respect, but it is worth remembering that this is someone looking at two other people from the outside. Things change when Cathy ends up briefly staying with the Linton family, living a slight distance away at Thrushcross Grange. If my timeline is right, this would be about 1777 or 1778, making her about 12 or 13 years old. When she comes back a little while later, her time with the family, which is implied to be wealthier and less dysfunctional than hers, has made her into more or less a proper lady, you could say, which immediately puts Heathcliff off. Cathy is encouraged by Frances to keep up her more appropriate behavior and continue associating with the Lintons. Incidentally, Frances ends up dying after giving birth to her and Hindley's son, Hareton, who is subsequently cared for by Nellie. Hindley, who was never exactly a shining star of compassion before, becomes an absolute beast after his wife's death. He gets drunk, messes around with guns, and generally acts a menace to the entire household, including his extremely young son, but especially Heathcliff. Cathy is kept up with the Lintons, particularly Edgar, and it becomes clear that he has an interest in her. We're about in 1780 at this point, with Kathy being maybe 15, and Heathcliff is about the same age, I think. Nellie might have said he was 16 at this point. I can't remember. Things come to a head when Kathy confesses to Nellie that Edgar Linton, son of the family, has proposed to her. Over the course of the conversation, she says that she loves Edgar because he has money and because he loves her. Her reasons are extremely shallow. Kathy actually loves Heathcliff, but says that marrying him would, and I quote, degrade her. In this context, I believe she means that in the sense of she would lose her social standing if she were to marry him. Unfortunately, Heathcliff hears all of this from the other room and takes off. For 3 years. So Kathy ends up marrying Edgar when she's 18 and brings Nellie to Thrushcross Grange with her, leaving little Hareton alone with Hindley, unfortunately. Poor kid starts going downhill immediately after being left alone with his alcoholic nightmare monster father and, what was his name? Joseph. He's kind of like the housekeeper, handyman of the house, and he's very religious and not the nicest person either. So Kathy's living it up with Edgar at Thrushcross Grange when Heathcliff comes rolling up again, clean and polished, and still an ass, but now a clean and moneyed ass. Edgar quickly gets a wild hair up his ass about how obviously delighted his wife is at her old friend returning. Kathy, meanwhile, gets a wild hair up her ass about Isabella, her sister-in-law, getting all hot and bothered over Heathcliff. Things come to a head, Heathcliff gets himself uninvited from Thrushcross Grange, and Kathy goes into a wild fit over it. I've tried to parse the kind of Victorian language and framing here, and I think this is meant to be an episode of mental illness, but it's a little hard to tell. The way people viewed health and physical and mental illness in the 1840s, when Bronte was writing this, not necessarily when it was set, doesn't necessarily mesh well with our understanding of it today. If I recall correctly, I think someone was subjected to bleeding in this book, if that helps you understand what phase of medical history we're talking about here. Long story short, Kathy becomes ill and ends up in bed for a while. After recovering, it's discovered that she's pregnant. Meanwhile, Isabella has run off and eloped with Heathcliff. Edgar does the I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed thing and refuses to go visit her. Nellie gets a letter from Isabella basically detailing her first day at Wuthering Heights, and there's a certain dark comedy element to it because every single person in that house, from Heathcliff to Joseph to Hindley to little Hareton, acts absolutely feral and unhinged towards her, and her attitude is basically, oh my god, everyone here is insane. Eventually, Isabella ends up cutting and running and going to live south with a friend, where she eventually gives birth to Heathcliff's son, whom she names Linton. Emily Bronte. Can we talk, please? Anyway, that occurs about, I think, 6 months after Heathcliff briefly reunites with Kathy, wherein they express their passion for one another, described, of course, in the most Victorian way possible. Apparently, this book was considered risque for its time because of the raw, unrestrained passion Heathcliff and Kathy had for one another. And I need to emphasize here how hilarious that is from a 2026 perspective, given that the only PDA Emily Bronte described on the page was kissing and caressing. Kathy becomes convinced that this is the last time she and Heathcliff are going to see each other and goes into a fit just as Linton comes home and finds Heathcliff in his house. That night, she gives birth to Kathy Jr. and then dies soon after. Heathcliff is naturally distraught, and Hindley dies soon after his sister. The story skips ahead some years. Kathy Jr. is the apple of Edgar's eye. After Isabella dies, young Linton is initially brought to live with them, but then Heathcliff asserts his paternity and demands that Linton come to Wuthering Heights to live with him. Hareton is being treated well enough by Heathcliff, but has been denied an education and is also encouraged to engage in rude habits, spitting and cursing and such. It's implied that his revenge against high and mighty Hindley is making Hindley's son into someone that will never be accepted in a polite society. Kathy Jr. develops some animosity with Hareton because of his lack of education, and Heathcliff starts conniving for her to marry Linton, who is her cousin, since she's set to inherit Thrushcross Grange. Edgar and Linton both happen to be dying at about the same time, and it's under the idea that the latter's time is short that Kathy and Nellie are lured to Wuthering Heights. From there, Heathcliff basically holds them both hostage until Kathy Jr. agrees to marry Linton. Kathy Jr. folds because, again, her father is dying and she desperately wants to get back to him before he goes. No great place to casually toss this detail in, so I figure I'll just do it here, but Heathcliff basically, while Edgar's grave is being dug beside Kathy's, goes into Kathy's grave, knocks a hole in her coffin, and maybe I'm misremembering this, but I think I have it right, turns her head to face the hole. Then he basically arranges to be buried on that side of her with a panel in his coffin open so they can look at each other for eternity. Kathy Jr. and Linton are married, and shortly after, Linton dies. Kathy Jr. is stuck at Wuthering Heights under Heathcliff's thumb, though she and Hareton eventually get to liking one another. Really liking one another. Heathcliff begins to decline and then dies at the ripe old age of 37. Kathy Jr., now inheriting Wuthering Heights as a result of her cousin marriage, now marries her other cousin, Hareton. End of story. Okay, so I understand why the fans of this book were losing their shit over this being called the greatest love story ever. Listen, to each their own. Everybody has their own interpretation, but, I was not picking up on a romance vibe here. In part, I think that might be because we're having a story told to us by someone not involved in that romance. Nellie is relating Catherine and Heathcliff's story through her own eyes, with her own opinions of their respective characters, and I feel like it was just a bit too far removed from Cathy and Heathcliff for me to really feel any sense of deep chemistry or romance between them. They were kids who got on well, became deeply attached to one another, and eventually developed romantic inclinations to one another. Or became completely toxically obsessed with one another, however you like to put it. I will say there were a couple of banger lines in here that, taken in isolation, feel pretty deep and romantic, if you like. Kathy saying that her and Heathcliff's souls are made of the same stuff, I thought was a pretty good line. I think it was a very poetic way of capturing the deep sense of kinship between the two of them. Additionally, the line from Heathcliff after Kathy's death that was featured in the official trailer, quote, "Be with me always, take any form, drive me mad, only do not leave me in this abyss where I cannot find you." Unquote. That's not the first time I've seen that quote plastered somewhere, and I understand why. Even if you take the romance aspect out of it completely, I think anyone who's lost a loved one can kind of vibe with that one. It really captures that, desperate urge to have that person back, even if it hurts you, because you miss them so much and can't bear the thought of never seeing them again. I think it captures a very raw part of the grieving process. I understand why it's popular. I think the line also hits really well within the context of the story and Heathcliff's character. He's an orphan. Only two people have ever loved him in spite of his less than stellar personality, that being Mr. Earnshaw and Kathy. Mr. Earnshaw he only had for a short time, but Kathy he had for a lot longer and had a deep connection with. He also probably didn't think he would be losing her anytime soon. Remember, Kathy dies at 19. I think the line gives us a peek into his heart, so to speak, and shows us a bit of vulnerability from him. But yeah, overall, the book did not feel very romantic to me. I get why fans of the book are resistant to it being classified as a romance novel, because yes, it has some romance in it, but it's kind of, I don't want to say it's a background feature, because it's fairly important to Heathcliff and Kathy's characters and motivations, but it's not the plot. I mean, Kathy dies halfway through the book. Can't say that about a lot of romance-focused books. I again have to come back to the fact that we're watching their relationship from the outside, since that's usually not how we watch romances unfold in media. Most romance books feature one or both of the characters in the relationship, so we see what's going on in their heads and hearts as they fall in love with one another. And when you see a character's internal narration, you get a sense for their true, authentic selves and how they fit with their love interest. Nellie being the narrator telling us about Heathcliff and Kathy inherently throws a wrench in that process, because where Kathy and Heathcliff might internally be able to justify their emotions and behaviors, Nellie can only tell us what she observes and her conclusions from those observations. Kathy, as a result, comes across as flighty, temperamental, selfish, and manipulative. Heathcliff comes across as cold, violent, vengeful, and harsh. I need to stress here that there is a scene in this book where he accidentally saves Hareton. Hindley drops him down the stairs, if I recall correctly, and Heathcliff just happens to be walking by and catches Hareton entirely by chance. And Nellie says that he looks pissed. He hates Hindley so much that he actually regrets saving Hareton's life because it would have pained Hindley if the child died. Nellie says, and I quote, "Had it been dark, I dare say, he would have tried to remedy the mistake by smashing Hareton's skull on the steps." Unquote. He hates Hindley so much that he seems actually regretful that he saved at this point, 2 or 3-year-old child from breaking his neck. There's also a very interesting quote on page 125 of my copy of the book. It occurs to me that citing page numbers is kind of pointless for a novel that's been reprinted millions of times, where Heathcliff literally says, quote, "She, this being Isabella, abandoned them under a delusion," he answered. picturing in me a hero of romance and expecting unlimited indulgences from my chivalrous devotion. I can hardly regard her in the light of a rational creature, so obstinately has she persisted in forming a fabulous notion of my character and acting on the false impressions she cherished. But at last, I think she begins to know me. I don't perceive the silly smiles and grimaces that provoked me at first, and the senseless incapability of discerning that I was in earnest when I gave her my opinion of her infatuation and herself." Unquote. Yeah, so even Heathcliff doesn't labor under the delusion that he's a good person. He knows he's a dick. Especially taking into consideration that he held Cathy Jr. and Nellie against their wills at Wuthering Heights so he could compel Cathy to marry Linton. Heathcliff is clearly portrayed as a massive bastard motivated by vengeance and malice. The rare moments of humanity from him are generally exceptions to the rule. He is so unfeeling that he can't even find it in himself to be tender to Cathy Jr. despite her being Cathy Earnshaw's daughter. He denies Hareton an education as revenge for his father's actions. He threatens his own dying son to meet his needs. Heathcliff is not a good person, and all the evidence I have at my disposal suggests that this is exactly the conclusion Emily Bronte wanted us to draw about him. I've heard people say that Wuthering Heights is meant to be a critique of classism, and yeah, that tracks. You can make a solid argument that Heathcliff would not have become the man he became if Mrs. Earnshaw and Hindley had not mistreated and rejected him as a child, and their basis for doing so was that he was a foundling with no status, boosted by the fact that Heathcliff's complexion suggests that he might be mixed race or something that is not 100% white Englishman. Heathcliff's entire life is dictated by that. We don't know his history before Mr. Earnshaw takes him in, but his perceived status as a low-born, potentially mixed-race poor informs how everyone else treats him. It bars him from being respected, and it bars him from the one thing he really wants, which is Cathy. The only reason she wouldn't marry him is because he's not on the same level as her class-wise. One could argue that if not for the rigid classism and elitism of the time, Heathcliff might have turned out far less of a bastard than he ended up being. Overall, I thought it was a good book. The characters were really interesting, I was invested in their stories, and overall, I thought this was a really solid Gothic novel full of drama, tragedy, and messed up stuff. I'm a fan of V.C. Andrews' work, and I feel a lot of those same vibes in Wuthering Heights. Especially the incest. The one thing I was a teensy bit disappointed about was the supernatural elements I'd heard about. I don't know, I'm not really feeling them. Probably the only scene in the book where I really felt any sense of, Gothic ghostly horror was Lockwood's dream at the beginning, you know.
Get still and wailed! Let me in!
Aside from that, I wasn't getting a whole lot of supernatural stuff from this book, even low-key. So yeah, overall, I enjoyed the book. I get why it's a classic, and I see its influence in some of the media I'm already familiar with, like the aforementioned V.C. Andrews. Naturally, there have been multiple adaptations for film and TV over the years, but the 2026 adaptation of the movie caused a real stir from the word go. The first thing I remember hearing about the 2026 Wuthering Heights adaptation was the controversy over the casting of Cathy and Heathcliff. Margot Robbie and Jacob Elordi are in their 30s and late 20s, respectively. This is a little less of a concern about Elordi since Heathcliff lives into adulthood, but since Cathy dies young, it seemed a bit strange to cast Margot Robbie. She's gorgeous, don't get me wrong, but she's 35, and not the type of 35 that can still low-key pass as, being in your early 20s. The other complaint about Margot Robbie's casting involves a greater discussion around Instagram face actors in period pieces. In short, the proliferation of modern cosmetic procedures among Hollywood actors means that many are unsuited for film and TV with historical settings. It's a little jarring to watch a film set in the 1800s and see an actress who's very obviously had work done. Breaks the immersion, you could say. Now, having not read the book up to this point, I just kind of shrugged and said, whatever. Maybe the movie ends up being so good that people ignore that factor and move on, or maybe they don't, whatever. Then the teaser dropped in September of last year. I think I may have seen YouTube thumbnails of people having less than kind opinions about it, so I went to looking. My impression of the teaser was that it was very TikTok coded, very produced with the intention of it being clipped and made into fan edits on TikTok. I mean, Jesus Christ, you put a Charlie XCX song over an adaptation of a Victorian novel. That's extremely TikTok. It also had a lot of sexual imagery, like Heathcliff working shirtless, shots of Cathy's heaving bosom, and, whatever this is, I don't know what this is. So yeah, a lot of weirdly sexual imagery for a classic Victorian era book that, goes out of its way to avoid the explicit subject of sex, as one did in that day and age. I would wager, again, that the implication of increased sexual activity in the movie is another TikTok, specifically BookTok, coded move. The BookTok girlies are known for loving their spicy romance books, and I have a sneaking suspicion that this teaser was engineered for the express purpose of capturing that specific audience's attention. The fans of the book were extremely, not happy with the teaser for all the reasons I mentioned, but also including the fact that the costuming doesn't look especially appropriate for the era the characters are living in. That's becoming a bit of an issue with Hollywood productions in general, skimping on the costuming budget to save money. Often the costumes aren't historically accurate, and they end up looking far too clean and nice and fit perfectly because the costuming department only wants to make one or two of those outfits, and they're not doing the Lord of the Rings thing where they have the actors go out and wear them in a little bit so they look like actual clothing instead of something fresh off the rack. Anyway, tangent aside, the teaser was poorly received all around. Lots of discourse erupted from it, and then the official trailer dropped in November. This one was better received. Still embracing the greatest romance ever told narrative, but at least it did a convincing job of conveying an emotional, yearning aspect to Heathcliff and Cathy's love. Still had a Charlie XCX song over it, but this one was a bit grander, I would almost say, bigger and more emotional, if you get my vibe. It worked. It worked for the trailer. And it worked for the vibe of the film. There were more outfits on display, and they were definitely... They were definitely outfits. Not sure if anyone in the 1700s wore them, but boy, were they outfits! By this point, I still had not read the novel, so I'm just kind of cruising along being like, okay, I have 0 point of reference for any of this, so I have no idea if people are being reasonable or just nitpicking. But now that I've read the book, I have some thoughts. First, I now get why people were so annoyed by Heathcliff and Cathy being portrayed by older actors, given how much of the drama takes place when they're teenagers. It's actually wild to me that Jacob Elordi looks so much older when he's supposed to be a teenager, and then looks way younger once Heathcliff returns to Wuthering Heights as an older person. I could believe that cleaned up Heathcliff is 19, but scruffy Heathcliff, he is 36, has a Honda, 2 kids, and a mortgage. But I could believe cleaned up Heathcliff to be a teenager. Maybe. And no shade to Margot Robbie, again, she's gorgeous, but she is not a teenager, and I can tell that immediately. You guys know the discourse in the Harry Potter fandom about the casting of Harry's parents in The Sorcerer's Stone? So the movies cast a pair of actors that, okay, to a child audience, would look like parents. Like, yes, these are people you could believe have an 11-year-old child. But it doesn't quite work, because Lily and James Potter died when they were, like, 21, I think? And that's a big part of the tragedy of their deaths. It wasn't just that Harry lost his parents, it's that Lily and James died so young. They were only 3 years out of school and barely had time to live their adult lives before they were killed. This is where my concern comes in for Cathy's casting specifically. She dies at 19 in the book. She is so young. And for the first half of the book, a lot of her and Heathcliff's behavior can, to some extent, be contextualized as the immature, passionate behavior you might expect from 2 teenagers. Representing these 2 characters visually as people in their late 20s or 30s has the power to affect how the audience perceives their behavior. It is a lot easier to stomach silly, short-sighted, and selfish behavior from a child or teenager than from a whole-ass adult. Speaking of the casting, there is a weirdly short list of actors credited on IMDb for this film as of my scripting of this review. Only 12 actors are listed, and Cathy Jr., Hareton, and Linton are not listed among them, which opens up a few possibilities. 1, this isn't a full cast list, which happens sometimes, I think. 2, actors might be playing double roles. Margot Robbie might play Cathy Sr. and Cathy Jr., for example, although I find that somewhat unlikely. Or 3, they're centering the entire film on Cathy and Heathcliff's love story and either changing things so that Cathy doesn't die, or they push the entire Cathy Jr. and company storyline out completely. If option 3 ends up being the case, it's just more fuel for the idea that this adaptation of Wuthering Heights is being reworked into a love story, which likely means that Cathy and Heathcliff's characters will be softened so that they're more palatable to a modern audience that's come to see a film expecting a love story. For what it's worth, that's not really unusual with movie adaptations. I don't know if you've ever read The Maze Runner, but they made those boys way friendlier in the film adaptations than they were in the book. As for the fashion and costuming, I kind of get the vibe that Emerald Fennell, the director, might be going for a more... How do I put this? It's like she's going for a particular aesthetic style here. I lack the vocabulary to put this into words properly, but there are a lot of hints from the official trailer that this film is going to lean into certain, like, surreal? Is that the word I'm looking for? I think they're going for a more surreal aesthetic film than they are a strict work of historical fiction. This could be a case of artistic license over sloppy work. However... I have a suspicion that Emerald Fennell is just going all out and doing whatever she wants with the source material. I found an article about some early reviews from the movie, and apparently it is... very sexual. Very, very sexual, which suggests that the film is taking certain liberties with the source material. Which, to be fair, isn't necessarily a bad thing. Part of the reason I don't run in fandom spaces anymore is because as I've become elderly, I've grown increasingly exhausted with people acting like a bad adaptation of a book or video game is the literal end of the world and we should all be rending our clothing in grief and rage over it. I'm all for critiquing media, especially if it's funny. I mean, obviously I run a book channel. But at the end of the day, it's not the end of the world that a book you love got a shitty adaptation. I would argue that this is especially the case for Wuthering Heights because, it's a classic novel that's been adapted several times before and will almost certainly end up being adapted again in the future. Inevitably, someone will have another go at it. If this one sucks, you will have more opportunities. So those are my thoughts on the book and my previewing thoughts for the movie. I'm recording everything up to this point now, and the next section will be recorded after I see the movie. Much like my Until Dawn movie review from last year on my main channel, if you'd like to see it, I'm probably going to do it 100% off the cuff. Unlike my Until Dawn review from last year, I will be making a solid effort not to say like and as much. There is a reason I script my review content. So, I will see you after I watch the movie. Alright, so, I'm back from the movie. I'm going to have to keep my voice down. There are some people in the room not far away from me, so I'm trying to be respectful and not, just yapping loudly with my review, filming this video. So, I did go see Wuthering Heights. I'm just going to do a quick overview of the movie, quick recap, whatever. The movie starts off with a hanging. There's a guy getting executed in public. The sounds are very, erotic. And we realize that a young Catherine and a young Nellie are at the execution watching it happen. In the beginning, it kind of depicts Nellie and Kathy as being kind of friends, and they go home after the hanging, and Mr. Earnshaw is there, and he is, I'm going to get into this a bit more, but they basically combined Mr. Earnshaw and Hindley into one character. So Mr. Earnshaw is a very kind of mercurial, temperamental drunk who is alternatively loving and hateful towards Kathy, who is an only child in this household. So one night, he gets blasted, gets drunk, goes out, brings Heathcliff home. Much like in the book, Heathcliff and Kathy almost immediately form a bond with one another, although I should mention that in this movie, I would say that at the beginning, Kathy and Heathcliff are probably more like 10 and 12 years old, as opposed to like 6 or 7 when the book kind of has them placed as meeting each other when Mr. Earnshaw brings Heathcliff home the first time. It doesn't, I guess you could say it has some bearing on the plot, but we find out that Nellie is the bastard daughter of a lord, and that she's been kind of sent off in hiding to, be a companion to Kathy. She's not Kathy's servant, she's not a maid in the household, she is Kathy's companion. I don't exactly remember Nellie's role in the book, but I do think she was like a housekeeper, basically. And she may have started off as a maid. I don't know. I don't recall exactly. But in the movie, she is very specifically meant to be Kathy's companion. After it's shown that Heathcliff and Kathy are getting closer to one another, and there's some implication that Nellie is kind of jealous, we flash forward about a decade. And the Thrushcross Grange has been sold to the Lintons. Now, in the adaptation, and I didn't get this at first, I was really confused, Edgar and Isabella are not siblings. Edgar is Isabella's, what's the phrase I'm looking for? She's his ward. He's her guardian. He's not her brother, he's her guardian, specifically. They are not related to one another. Kathy's dad, Mr. Earnshaw, he is still alive. He is still a drunk. He is still mean. Mr. Earnshaw has kind of put Wuthering Heights in a dangerous position, a little bit like Hindley from the books, where he's a drunk, he's gambling, and he's wasting away all of Wuthering Heights' money. So, consequently, Kathy, Heathcliff, Mr. Earnshaw, and I should mention here too, I'm sorry, this is a little disjointed again, I'm doing this off the cuff. Heathcliff was never like the favored son of the house. When Mr. Earnshaw brings him in, he's basically a stable boy servant pretty much immediately. He's friends with Kathy, but he is still a servant from the beginning. He is not treated kindly and warmly the way that Mr. Earnshaw treats him in the book. So Mr. Earnshaw has basically put Wuthering Heights in a very precarious financial position, and Kathy gets the idea to throw herself at Mr. Linton, Edgar Linton, for the purposes of, getting them out of the financial hole. Heathcliff obviously is not very happy about this, but Kathy eventually decides to go over to Thrushcross Grange, and she spies on Edgar and Isabella as they're talking in the garden, and she gets startled when Isabella spots her, screams, Kathy falls off the wall, sprains her ankle, and that is how she and the Lintons end up meeting one another. Heathcliff is not there. In the book, Heathcliff is there. In this, Kathy went entirely on her own. So she's laid up at Thrushcross Grange. I apologize, I'm going to keep bungling the word Thrushcross Grange this entire review. She's laid up there. Her dad's very happy about it because, Edgar is rich. And Nellie's very happy about it too. Heathcliff's the only one that's not happy about it. He wants to go get Kathy because obviously he's, not very happy about the possibility of her. He knew that she was contemplating throwing herself at Edgar Linton for the purposes of, kind of seducing him. And the implication being that she wanted to potentially marry him to get Wuthering Heights out of the financial hole. He knew that was her way of thinking. He knew that was her potential plan. And so he does not want Kathy over at Thrushcross Grange any longer than she needs to be. So Kathy comes back. Much like in the book, she's kind of transformed. She's a lady now. She's all, hoity-toity and dressed nicely. And Heathcliff is not happy. Kathy does not help by immediately being confrontational with him when she gets back and, kind of provoking him a little bit. They have a falling out. I guess this does nothing but add a little bit to the tension between the two of them. But there's a night where Kathy goes to Heathcliff, who sleeps in the barn, by the way. She goes up to talk to him, and while she's kind of on that upper level of the barn getting ready to talk to him, Joseph, who in the movie is like in his 20s, he comes into the barn with a maid named Zilla. And if you recall that scene from the trailer where there was a guy with a whip and then there was a girl who had like a horse's bridle in her mouth, this is that scene. And basically Heathcliff and Kathy watch that entire thing unfold and, ooh, sexual tension, yay. So the next day, Kathy is, still a bit hot and bothered over it. So she goes off into the moors and, has a date with Rosie Palms, which Heathcliff walks in on. And then, he, if you recall the scene from the trailer, where he's out on the moors and he has Kathy's fingers in his mouth. That's the scene. That's the scene. That's what he does after he catches Kathy having a date with Rosie Palms. It's also the scene from the trailer. You may recall from the teaser trailer where he grabs her by the corset strings and kind of yanks her up to him. That is also in this scene. So Kathy rejects him. She goes home. Edgar arrives. They talk. He proposes. She says yes. And then we get the scene between Kathy and Nellie, where it's the one that I pointed out earlier, where it's like, Kathy's kind of sitting on the floor and crying as Ellie's like, "Where's the obstacle? If you like Mr. Edgar Linton, then shouldn't you be happy to marry him? And you already said yes, so why do you give a fuck about my opinion?" But that scene happens, and kind of like I predicted, they definitely portrayed Kathy. So they tried to justify it a little bit in the book. And please understand, this is just my reading of the book. Maybe someone else has a different interpretation. I mentioned before that Kathy's, in that scene, she is described as being grave. She is described as being kind of fidgety, unsettled, restless, whatever. But she also is unmistakably marrying Edgar Linton for selfish reasons. And this is kind of where it kind of gets a bit complicated, because in the book, Wuthering Heights is not in, well, no, it kind of was. I was going to say at that point, I don't think Wuthering Heights was in financial destitution the way it is in the movie. In the book, Kathy comes across like she's marrying Edgar Linton for personally selfish reasons. Like, oh, well, I love him because he loves me and because he worships the ground I walk on, and also he's rich and I would like to be rich. And, marrying Heathcliff would be great, but it would also degrade me socially. Her tone, as I read it in the book, was a lot more flippant. It was a lot more, it didn't feel like she was questioning her decision so much. Like, I know she's going in there and she's asking Nellie, like, did I make the right choice? Did I make the right choice? But ultimately, Kathy's bearing in that scene comes across to me like she's already made this choice and she just kind of wants validation for the idea that she's made the correct choice. Like, it's already a foregone conclusion that she cannot marry Heathcliff. So, I don't know. Her tone to me in the book just comes across a bit more flippant, a bit more like, well, this is how it has to be. Whereas in the movie, they go out of their way to kind of show her being like sad and torn apart about it. And she justifies the idea of marrying Edgar by saying like, well, if I marry him, he'll have money and I can like help, the financial situation at Wuthering Heights, and I can lift Heathcliff out of poverty and get him away from my evil, cruel, drunk father. So the movie does go out of its way a little bit to kind of be like, oh, she's not selfish, she's not materialistic, she's doing this to help. It kind of did a little bit of that justification thing. I'm going to get into that a little bit more when I kind of recap or kind of go into my analysis at the end. But Heathcliff overhears. Nellie sees him listening in. And she does not tell Kathy that he's there. And much like in the book, the only part that Heathcliff really hears is the part where Kathy says that marrying Heathcliff would degrade her. And then he walks away before he hears her say like, oh, but I love him so much, I want to marry him. Heathcliff runs off. Kathy immediately like changes her mind the next morning, is like, I gotta go over to see Edgar because I'm regretting this. I gotta take the proposal, I gotta take my acceptance for the proposal off, we're not getting married. Then she finds out that Heathcliff is gone and she waits a long time thinking, oh, he's going to come back. He doesn't. So I think a year passes before she finally goes off and marries Edgar. By the way, the song playing as she's crossing the moors in the white dress to arrive at Thrushcross Grange. Very nice scene, but the song that was playing was great. I believe it's called The Dark-Eyed Sailor or something like that. I don't know if it's a folk song, and I don't know how far back it goes, but it was very nice, and it was very tonally and historically appropriate for this film. The other thing I forgot to mention, too, with the whole scene between Kathy and Nellie, there's a point where Nellie asks Kathy, hey, why are you, if you already said yes and you've already decided that this is what you have to do, then why are you asking my opinion on it? She's like, oh, I want some compassion and kindness maybe, or do you not understand how love works because no one's ever loved you before? Like, she takes a shot at Nellie basically being the hidden away bastard daughter of a lord. I can't recall, as I'm sitting here right now, if that insult came before or after Nellie knew that Heathcliff was listening in on the conversation. So it might have been that she didn't tell Kathy that Heathcliff was there as kind of like payback for the fact that she just said something really nasty to her, but I don't quite recall. Kathy gets married to Edgar. She goes to Thrushcross Grange. Isabella is a fucking weirdo. They depicted Isabella in this film as the most grimy little gremlin. she is weird, man. Her wedding gift to Kathy is a doll made of Kathy's own hair. And she's looking at Kathy as she's giving her the doll, and she's like, yeah, I knew I wanted to make you this doll. It's your real hair. I pulled it out of your brush after you left. And it's just they portrayed her as being like a little weirdo. I think I'm kind of going off my notes as I'm going through this. There's a couple more examples later. The Lintons in general are a bit weird. Their entire house is I would almost say it's like a surreal tribute to ostentatious wealth. Like, they're so wealthy that it almost becomes like bizarre. I think I showed pictures from the trailer of like that white and red room where above the fireplace they have the hands reaching down. But there's other stuff like that. Edgar gives Kathy her own room, which I think was fairly typical in that day and age, at least for households that could afford to have that. The wife might have her own room, the husband would have his own room, and then they'd go to each other's rooms on various nights when they wanted to, do the freaky frack. But Edgar gives Kathy her own bedroom, and he literally, I'm not kidding you, he makes the walls the color of her flesh. Literally, if you look carefully, you see that there are veins on the wall, like bluish veins that you would find under her skin. And he points out a freckle on the wall that belongs to Kathy. It's a very weird scene. I've never seen Emerald Fennell's other stuff, but I've heard tell on the internet that this is kind of typical of her style. She does a lot of weird stuff. So there's this big, montage where it shows Kathy and the Lintons partying it up, and Nellie lives with them too. She comes with Kathy to Thrushcross Grange. But they're partying it up. There's these displays of, like, again, that surreal, ostentatious wealth. You'll understand what I mean if you see the movie or if you see the images coming out of the movie. It's very interesting visual design stuff. And the montage ends, by the way, with that scene from the trailer with the fish. With the fish. During the montage, it's implied for a couple of years to have passed at this point. I don't know how many. I think it's probably about 2 or 3 at least, maybe 4 at the most. And it's Christmas again. We find out that Kathy is pregnant. And my notes here say that Isabella wants to skinwalk Kathy. She gives Kathy this friendship book where she's like, "Oh, that's an image of your silhouette, which I would dearly love to have one day. Oh, and here's a pop-up picture of a mushroom that looks a lot like a certain appendage on a man." Lots of sexual imagery in this film. It's subtle in some parts and not very subtle in others. But, like, she says, "Remember when we went walking and you said, 'Oh, look at that mushroom'?" And she went and put the mushroom in the friendship book, like a pop-up picture of the mushroom. Like, this girl is trying, she wants to single white female Kathy. It's very eerie. But anyway, so we find out that Kathy is pregnant. And the night that she tells Edgar that, she goes to get into bed, and she finds a broken egg in her sheets. It's just a callback to a prank that she pulled on him earlier in the film. That is her hint that Heathcliff is back, and apparently has entered her home without her or Edgar or anybody else knowing. So she goes looking for him on the moor. She finds him in the mist. She hugs him, yells at him for being away for so long and just disappearing without a word. She invites him to dinner. He comes to dinner, and we find out that Heathcliff has bought Wuthering Heights. Isabella now starts trying to seduce Heathcliff. She later on has a discussion with Kathy where she's like, "Oh, he's so hot. He's so great. He's the most beautiful man I've ever seen." And Kathy, kind of like, I think this happened in the book, she tries to dissuade Isabella from this particular attraction, obviously for her own selfish reasons, but also she says, and I quote, that Heathcliff is rough, wild, and has a wicked temper. And she tries to basically dissuade Isabella from going anywhere near him. Isabella then proceeds to do the single white female thing, and remember that doll I mentioned earlier that she gave to Kathy as a wedding present? So it's in this massive dollhouse. You can see it in the trailer. And so Kathy goes and opens the dollhouse one day, and she's freaked out to see that Isabella has stabbed the doll with a tiny knife, and the little tiny knife is sticking out of Kathy's doll, and there's fake blood all around the doll. Like, Isabella they did her dirty in this film. Kathy again tries to, I think there was a similar scene in the book where Kathy she brings Isabella into a discussion between her and Heathcliff and basically tries to bully her and humiliate her out of pursuing Heathcliff. Kathy and Heathcliff get into an argument. Kathy is clearly jealous. Heathcliff is still mad about Kathy marrying Edgar, and he still thinks that, "Oh, well, marrying him will degrade me." He's still mad about that. So the two of them get into an argument. They part ways. I must confess that it was at this point during the film I had to go to the bathroom for 5 minutes, so I did miss 5 minutes of film. When I came back, Kathy was kicking her dead father in the head at Wuthering Heights. Yeah, so I think the part that I missed when I was in the bathroom, again, this is something that was clipped in the trailer, where Kathy's in the room kneeling over a body with a bunch of alcohol bottles in the corners. The father is implied to have died. She goes over to Wuthering Heights. She's mourning him, and then she kicks him repeatedly in the head. So she runs out into the rain. Heathcliff goes running out after her. They have the bit again from the trailer where it's like, why did you leave me? Why did you betray your own heart? And so they have the discussion, and she's like, he tells her, I heard what you said about marrying me would degrade you. And she's like, well, you missed the part where I said I love you. So they kiss, they resolve things, and now they're having an affair. Nellie finds out very quickly, or she suspects very quickly, that the two of them are having an affair. There's a whole montage where they're just banging and meeting up constantly in carriages and on the moors and in the house and then in the garden, and then it's just a full-on affair between the two of them. Heathcliff does not know that she is pregnant. After this montage, there's a scene, and he reveals that, I forget exactly how the line goes. It was something in relation to the conversation he overheard. But he says, oh, well, I assumed that you knew I was there. And she said, why would you assume I knew that? And he said, well, because Nellie saw me. And so Kathy is now pissed because she realizes that Nellie knew that Heathcliff was listening in on that conversation. And Nellie did not stop her from saying anything. She didn't alert her that Heathcliff was there. And she calls Nellie out, basically saying, like, you jerk. If I had been able to confront Heathcliff immediately, I would have gone back on Edgar's proposal, and I probably would have married Heathcliff. So she tells Nellie to fuck off. Like, leave. Go find a different job. I don't want you here anymore. Nellie is pissed. And so she goes ahead and tells Edgar about the affair. Edgar immediately tells Kathy she's got to stop seeing Heathcliff. He doesn't outright say, I know you're having an affair, but he's like, you've been spending an awful lot of time with Heathcliff, and given your delicate condition, this is kind of a problem. You wouldn't want people getting the wrong idea, right? So he doesn't call her out all the way, but there's kind of an understanding there that he knows what's up. Heathcliff shows up, obviously pissed off that Kathy has left him hanging, and they have a conversation. She goes back inside, and he overhears Edgar acknowledging that Kathy is pregnant. So Heathcliff literally breaks into the house later on, either that night or the next night. He confronts Kathy, and he's like, well, is it my kid? And she goes, no, I knew I was pregnant before you ever came back. Which is really fascinating, because the implication is that this affair has been going on for a couple months. You think Kathy would be showing by now. Maybe they just didn't want to spring for the money for a prosthetic stomach. So there's a bit of a line in there. They're getting all hot and heavy again, like they're going to resume the affair. And Heathcliff's like, did you think I would mind that you were pregnant? I would only have enjoyed it more, introducing the creator's barely concealed fetish. Anyway, they bing bong. And Heathcliff, he wants to kill Edgar. And he is dead ass about this. Like, Kathy's like, are you serious? Would you kill him? And he's like, yeah, I would go strangle him right now. Tell me you want me to go do that. And she's like, sorry. I'm not going to remember the exact wording. She said that she had thought that marrying Heathcliff would degrade her. And now she's worried that she is being degraded and that they need to end the affair immediately so that they are both not further degraded by this. So Heathcliff is obviously furious. Now he goes after Isabella. And there is a scene where he enters her room. I think it's maybe within hours of that last bing bong with Kathy. But so he enters Isabella's room, and he goes up to her. And I typed out in my notes the quote as accurate as possible. So I think I'm quoting verbatim here, but I'm not 100% sure. Kathy is right. I am rough, cruel, cold, and unfeeling. Do you want me to stop? And he's coming up to her and kind of like tugging on the ribbons on her brassiere or nightdress or whatever it is you'd call it. I don't love you. I'll never love you. I'll treat you cruelly. Do you want me to stop? I love Catherine, and I'm never going to love you, and I'll think of her when I'm with you. Do you want me to stop? And at no point, I was taking notes, so I didn't hear Isabella say, no, don't stop. I assume she was nodding her head, though. I don't know, though, because I had my head bent over my phone like an idiot not watching. Isabella consents. They run off together and get married. Isabella goes to Wuthering Heights, and she writes a letter to Nellie, and it is not entirely verbatim, but, Nellie, what have I married? Is he a man? Is he mad? Or is he a devil? He has me under a spell. Please help me. Turns out, the letter was employed by Heathcliff. He and Isabella are sitting in in the kitchen of Wuthering Heights, and the place is just a wreck. It is disgusting. Like, it is not fit for human habitation. But they're sitting together at this table, and he's trying to get her to write another letter. I think he's trying to lure Kathy back to Wuthering Heights. And Isabella's making fun of him because he's illiterate. They basically took the side plot of Kathy Jr. and Hareton, Kathy Jr. trying to teach Hareton to read. They took that side plot from Wuthering Heights, the book, and they gave it to Kathy and Heathcliff at the beginning of this movie. So this is a continuation of that. Heathcliff is illiterate. As it happens, Isabella is not the victim in the film the way that she was in the book. She is literally batshit crazy. She is a co-conspirator with Heathcliff to kind of give him whatever he wants. She doesn't care. Nellie keeps burning the letters that they send because she's trying to discourage Catherine from getting back with Heathcliff. And Edgar is ignoring Kathy right now, basically because she's in mourning over the fact that Isabella and Heathcliff got married. Edgar, by the way, is also completely pissed about Isabella. In the book, he's more kind of like sad and disappointed about it, being like, I don't hate her, but also I don't want her here right now. He's a lot angrier in the film. Kathy is borderline catatonic. She claims to Nellie that she has miscarried the baby. And Nellie's like, what do you mean you miscarried? Was there blood? And Kathy's like, no. And so Nellie says, oh, okay, well, you didn't fucking miscarry then. There would be blood if you had miscarried. That will be important for later. Kathy goes kind of into the fit that she went into in the book. There's a different twist, though. Nellie goes out to visit Heathcliff and Isabella. This is where we get that scene from the trailer where Isabella has, like, a chain around her neck and is crawling on the floor. It's a very weird scene. She's got a collar around her neck and she's barking like a dog, and she and Heathcliff are just, like, completely out of their fucking minds. It's insane. And Nellie is saying, like, Isabella, come home with me. And Isabella's like, no, I am home. She's happy with this. She's perfectly happy with this. And Heathcliff says to Nellie, oh, tell Kathy I found my match in degradation. It's a wild scene. I'm gonna tell you right now. It is completely insane. So Nellie goes home. She keeps burning the letters. Kathy is hallucinating about seeing a young Heathcliff outside. And eventually, Nellie loses her patience and tries to force Kathy out of bed. And she sees Kathy's legs, and they have all these, like, awful, like, red veins on them. And what we come to realize is that Kathy was not wrong when she said that she miscarried the baby. She miscarried the baby and didn't pass it. Consequently, she basically has sepsis now because she never passed the dead baby. So, Nellie is blamed by Edgar for not taking Kathy's fit seriously. Because remember, Nellie was telling Edgar, well, I don't know if I clarified this earlier. Nellie was telling Edgar, nah, ignore her. She's still mourning. She's still being a baby over Heathcliff and Isabella getting married. Ignore her and let her know that there are consequences for acting this way. So he has not been going near Kathy. Nellie has been the one looking after Kathy, and Nellie is the one who missed the signs that Kathy had miscarried. So Nellie goes and tells Heathcliff, who immediately goes racing off for Thrushcross Grange. Nellie takes Isabella out of Wuthering Heights. Heathcliff arrives at Thrushcross Grange. It's too late. Edgar is surprisingly nice to him and tells him, no, don't go see her. You don't want to see this. Heathcliff goes up anyway. Kathy's dead. And this is the final scene where he does the big line, be with me always, drive me mad, just don't leave me in this abyss line. Very big, very emotional. It flashes back to them being in love and being kids and, special little moments between the two of them. And then the movie's over. Done. So, number one, I think I said earlier in the video, one of my theories was that they were going to end the movie with Kathy dying, and if I said that, I was correct. It was one of my 3 theories. I just don't remember if I iterated it in this video. It definitely was more surreal and kind of going for a certain bizarre style aesthetic than it was trying to be historically accurate. I don't think this film was even remotely trying to be historically accurate, or at least if it was kind of in the more like general old-timey fashion ways. But even then, a lot of Kathy's outfits were not even remotely historically accurate. But I don't think that's what they were going for in this film. In terms of personality, Kathy was not too far removed from her depiction in the book. She's definitely fiery. She's definitely got a temper. She's definitely childish, and she's definitely selfish to an extent. But they did definitely also soften her a bit for the movie. Again, I go back to that scene where she's like, well, if I marry Edgar, I can lift Heathcliff out of poverty and I can get him away from my evil father. They tried to justify it because marrying this person is going to degrade. The original scene in the book makes Kathy look a lot more selfish. And when I say selfish, I mean personally selfish. It's not just, I've had a hard life and I would like something better for myself. But in the book, it's a lot more, yeah, I am in love with Heathcliff, but damn, the Lintons do be rich, though. You know, that's at least how it came across to me in the book. You may have a different interpretation, and that's fine. That's just how it came across to me. The movie was going out of its way to kind of make her a little softer, a little more conflicted, a little more whatever. The fact that she immediately regrets and is like, I'm gonna go tell Edgar that I don't want to marry him anymore, sorry, I just can't do it. You know, that again was, I think, an attempt to kind of get the audience to be like, okay, Kathy made a mistake. This wasn't her being selfish. This was her making a mistake. But they definitely softened her for the movie. I mentioned this before, but they basically combined Mr. Earnshaw and Hindley into one character. And that's really interesting to me because it serves to affect Heathcliff's character and motivations. Mr. Earnshaw, in the book, treats Heathcliff like one of his own kids. He actually treats him a little bit better than his actual son Hindley, which is why Hindley ends up hating Heathcliff so much. So he takes Heathcliff in and he teaches him to read and he gives him an education right alongside his other kids. And he's generally just very nice to Heathcliff. So Heathcliff spends his early life up until Mr. Earnshaw's death being treated very well. Well, except for like his very early years. We don't really know exactly what happened to him before that. But the point is that he's living in a household where he is accustomed to being treated like a child and not a servant. Then after Mr. Earnshaw dies, Hindley comes back. He still hates Heathcliff. He still resents him. So he immediately bumps him down to a servant. So Heathcliff has gone from being a street urchin to being brought into a family home and being treated like a member of that family and being treated like a child, a beloved child, to suddenly being a servant. A lot of his anger and a lot of his resentment towards Hindley and how Hindley treats him is a big part of the reason. It's kind of what kickstarts his attitude of like, I'm going to, go out and get rich and come back and completely fuck over Hindley's life because he, treated me so poorly. And it is incidentally one of those things that pushes him to be his worst self, where, again, there's that scene that I mentioned earlier. He accidentally saves Hareton's life and it's like, oh, well, at least as far as Nellie goes, she looks at Heathcliff and says, oh, he wants to kill that kid. I think he would have killed him just for the purposes of spiting Hindley if he could have. And then when Hareton is older, the attitude is like, well, I'm not going to hurt the kid, but I am basically going to raise him in such a way that he is so rude and so incompatible with the higher social class life that he's just never going to be accepted among them. So I'm screwing Hindley over from the grave. Heathcliff in general is softened in this film. He has a couple moments of temper where he smashes a chair in response to Kathy saying that she's going to go throw herself at Mr. Linton. But generally speaking, he doesn't really cross any major lines. He doesn't show any of like the really concerning signs of violence that Nellie mentions in the book. And because the entire second half of the book is cut out, where it's Kathy Jr., Hareton, and Linton, and Heathcliff is maneuvering them around like pawns and using them and holding them hostage and treating them terribly, you completely miss out on that half of his characterization. The movie just basically cuts out that part that would have shown him behaving in an objectively way worse fashion. And Isabella, his treatment of Isabella is in a way legitimized because he walks up to her and he tells her the deal right from the word go. I don't love you. I'm not going to be nice to you. I'm going to treat you cruelly. I love Kathy. And are you still okay with this? You know, do you want me to stop? And Isabella does not want him to stop. And then when she's living with him at Wuthering Heights, she's cooperating with him. She is being his freaky little co-conspirator where they're I assume banging left and right. And he's literally putting a chain around her neck and having her bark like a dog. But that was such a weird scene. That was such a weird scene. But the thing is that in having Isabella being okay with that treatment. In the book, Isabella is horrified when she gets to Wuthering Heights because everyone there acts like a lunatic towards her. And she only lasts so long there before she eventually moves south to be with a friend and has Linton because she's just like, I physically cannot stay in that house with that man. All of them are insane, but Heathcliff is evil. In the film, they completely recontextualize that relationship. They make her so freaky that she's like, yeah, I'm perfectly fine with having a collar put around my neck. Treat me cruelly, daddy. You know, that's basically how they portray her. So they take the sting out of his treatment of Isabella because she's consenting to it. It was very interesting to me because I had a feeling they were going to do that. Just from the way the trailer looked and the fact that I didn't see any credited actors for Kathy Jr. or Hareton or Linton, I'm thinking to myself, it smells like they're going to base the entirety of this film on Heathcliff and Kathy's romance. And they're either going to have Kathy survive at the end. My other theory is that, you know, like, oh, maybe Edgar's going to die and the funeral they would be attending was his and then she would get with Heathcliff in the end. Or the ending of the movie was going to be that Kathy died. Consequently, they went with option 2. And, yeah, that's the movie. I didn't hate it. It's one of those situations where I think I would argue that my attitude towards this version of Wuthering Heights is similar to my attitude about the 1980 adaptation of The Shining. I think the 1980 version of The Shining is a good film on its own merits, but I don't think it is a good adaptation of Stephen King's The Shining. I think the 1997, 1999 miniseries that they did, that is a much more faithful adaptation of the book, and I consequently liked it a lot better. Not to say I didn't like the 1980 version of The Shining, but it's not a good adaptation of the book. My attitude towards this Wuthering Heights is, I think it is a good film. I think it is. The cinematography is great. I thought the set design was really interesting. There were some very interesting creative choices done here. It was very weird. And I think in general, like, I'm not going to say I didn't like the film, but it is a horrible adaptation of the book. It sits loosely on the skeleton of the book. So yeah, I mean, I guess I'd recommend it, you know, especially if you haven't read the book or you have read the book and you're just like, whatever, I don't care that much. If you're going to get like really upset though over whether or not they adapted it from the book properly, then you should probably not go see this film. You're not going to like it. But if you're okay with, you know, the deviations and you can kind of take it in stride, you might like this one. I wouldn't say it's a bad film. It's an incredibly weird and sexual one, but it's not bad. But yeah. All right, well, that's the review. Damn, this one's going to be long. All right, you guys have a good night.